May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The lessons for today contain some of the most profound teachings of our religious tradition, and also some of the most practical advice, I think, for living that faith in the real world. The story of Moses on Mount Sinai, experiencing the presence of God, discerning a call by God for him to deliver the Hebrew people out of Egypt, and Moses' uncertainty about his ability to fulfill that call. All that leads up to the revelation to Moses of God's name, a new understanding of God's reality. I am who I am, God says. That's our translation of the word. There are others. John Dotson, I know, prefers translations that say, I will be who I will be, which is also possible. I had a back doctor who was also a rabbi, and whose vocation was exploring the deeper meanings of Scripture by connecting the Hebrew words not only with their traditional meanings and derivations, but also through relating those words to roots in other Semitic languages. So we saw each passage having 2 or maybe 4 layers of meaning. And his translation of God's name was that which causes everything to come into existence. In none of these cases is that name really a noun or derived from a noun, a person, place, or thing. God is verbal or expresses action, always in process. And I think that's important too. This revelation of God's name is an explanation, really, is an anticipation of the commandment to make no idols. God's name says it is not limited, that God is not limited as some object in space or time, or as some subject relating to other objects. God is not to be thought of really as a being, not even a supreme being. Here, God is revealed as being itself, the ground of all being, or the process of becoming, whatever, whoever, the source of all being. We can only experience God really in limited ways because we are limited. We describe God's nature only with similes and analogies and comparisons with what's familiar to us. And confined by our own limitations. God is experienced maybe as a father, by some experienced as a king. These comparisons to God say really more about us than they do about God. But they call us into a relationship with that ground of being. It's that relationship told of in the Scriptures that calls us into faith. And we experience that relationship in different ways, at different times, in different places. Some places may seem to enhance our relationship with God, like church or nature, Mount Sinai, in Jerusalem. But God is everywhere. God is present everywhere, unlimited by anything, the source of everything, including ourselves, everything about us, everything in the world in which we live, everything we experience or think or dream or feel. I am who I am, he said. I will be who I will be. The one who causes all things to come into existence. That's an awesome insight. It's an insight maybe that Greek philosophers had 500, 600 years after this was written. It does, however, lead to one problem. If God is that which causes everything to come into existence, that would have to include viruses. It would have to include destructive fires and hurricanes. It would have to include famines and mental illness and the capacity for people to be cruel or greedy or violent. If God is the source of everything, that which causes everything to come into existence, then God is the source of both life and death, both good and evil. And that is troubling for monotheists, and has been since before Moses set foot on Mount Sinai. We want God to be on our side. Our relationship with God feels that way. We want things to go our way. And we're confused in our faith when they don't. So Jews and Christians and Muslims have tried to rationalize this situation in order to relieve God some way of the responsibility for all the bad things that can happen to us, but without conceding God's ultimate power and creative energy. One of the approaches to that involved imagining a secondary power bringing evil into the world in opposition to God. You see that most clearly expressed in the Persian religion, although the Persian religion was not monotheistic, it was dualistic. They believed in a good God and a bad God, a God of light and a God of darkness. And history and the human heart were the battlefield on which they fought. And that Persian idea came to influence all three Abrahamic traditions in figures like Satan or the devil, the tempter, legions of demons. Necessarily subservient to God, ultimately doomed to fail, but causing a lot of suffering on the way. But if you're a monotheist and believe in only one God as the creator of all that is, Satan and all his works are a part of God's creation. A second way people have tried to reconcile the belief in an all-powerful and all-loving God with the experience of evil and suffering was to see that suffering as somehow a justifiable punishment. That was the viewpoint of the person or people who wrote the book of Deuteronomy and edited other parts of the Torah. The people of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of their enemies. That's the way it was supposed to go. You could have seen a modern version of that back when on New Year's Eve in 2011 in Beebe, Arkansas, hundreds, maybe thousands of birds fell dead from the trees. And a popular preacher said that that was because the state was considering providing health care for same-sex domestic partners. It was a punishment. Not sure the birds like that. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. What do I need to do to make it up? But we know bad things happen to good people. How can we say that everyone in the path of a pandemic or a raging fire or a hurricane somehow deserved what they got? The babies? The first responders, nurses and doctors, firefighters on the line? I don't think so. I don't think so. I know at times this kind of thinking can be an intellectual exercise, a theological debate about what's called the problem of the evil. But we have faced a lot of stuff this year. People have suffered a great deal. So if we're to keep our faith, and if that faith can help us get through these times, we have to face this issue. There are a couple ways that have helped me in dealing with this without despair, without discouragement. To keep my head above water and my relationship with God in a way that seems secure. And it involves a shift of perspective on two different points. The first point is to recognize that it's not all about me. It's not all about us. It's not about the Arkansas legislature. The coronavirus doesn't target anyone. It just grows and spreads because that's what it does. It needs human cells in order to replicate itself and survive, and it settles wherever it can in whomever happens to be in the way. It doesn't sense that those cells are a part of someone's life. It does what it does. It is what it is. It's not angry. It's not personal. Neither is fire. Neither is a hurricane. We suffer on their account, but we just happen to be in the way. Their reason for existence is not our suffering. Creation inevitably involves some things that we may experience as suffering. But that's not its purpose. We have to stop taking this personally. That's what Peter found out in the story from the gospel today. He had affirmed his belief that Jesus was the Messiah, but he thought that meant that Jesus would triumph in the world and that those who were with him, coincidentally, would also triumph, would not have to suffer, would be blessed by God and live in happiness and peace. But in reaction to that, Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." The purpose of everything that arises in reality is not something that we can understand from a human perspective. Not in its fullness. It is, however, something that we have to accept if we're going to live the life we've been given in the real world which exists. And that led me to a second shift that has been quite helpful. We often view experiences in life, the good and the bad, the joys and the sorrows, as external events that happen to us, but might not have happened in other circumstances. And we think we can determine what to do to have the good things happen and avoid the bad. We might think as we lay in our hospital bed that we probably shouldn't have gone to that packed bar for 3 hours with everyone dancing and no one wearing masks. We might think when standing by the blown-in ruins of our home that we should have built it a little farther from the shoreline. Maybe we should have raked the forest debris better around the edges of our property. But that's not our reality, nor is it God's reality. If we hadn't gotten sick, if we hadn't lost our house, we'd be someone else. But God apparently wants us as we are, not someone else. And that involves every single moment in our life. We think sometimes that experiences are things that happen to us, that come into our lives, when in reality, we just are those experiences, the series of that experience. Those experiences are our lives as we move along and encounter them in our relationship. We are always in a relationship with the world the way it is. We don't create it. In fact, the word that's used in the Bible when it says that God created the heavens and the earth, the word for create is bara, and it is not used of anyone but God. Only God creates. All things come of thee, O Lord. What's required of us is not to stand around and judge whether we like or don't like the experience we've been thrown into, but to respond to it, to respond to the world, one moment at a time, and deal with it as best we can. We tend, I think, to live ahead of ourselves all the time, especially in the modern age when things are stressful and move so fast. We're constantly scanning the future for opportunities or problems that may be coming our way. But that's a delusion. That future doesn't exist yet, and we're as much wrong as we are right about it. The past is unalterable. It's a given, it's there. The present passes very quickly, but the present is the place where we're in relationship with reality. That's that calls our attention to respond to what is. And that's a reality that comes from God. And in our response, we're responding as we were created to respond and share in God's creative love. Our experience, all our experience, is a gift from God. A necessary encounter for each of us to live through in order to be who we really are. We can plan. We can complain. We can try to choose the good and reject the bad, but we never know the full effect of those choices. Paul says that really all we can do is hope. be patient in our suffering. He says not to oppose the sources of our suffering, but rather to bless them for the gift and call that they are. Lately, so many people are caught up in righteous anger, righteous indignation on all sides of every issue, it seems. Blame and hate circle around us like hurricanes or tornadoes. Hate and blame knock down everything in front of them, like the raging forest fire. But that's not the way our faith is leading us. Rather, our faith calls us to enter into suffering, to help with the healing, to bring forth the truth. And we trust God in our faith that the truth will set us free. Life is often not very fair. It gives joy and sorrow in unequal proportions that are distributed unequally. And we don't have to like that or do stuff that perpetuates it. But we can only oppose it if we accept it. We're called to live it exactly as it comes. Our faith can uphold us in these most difficult times if we let God be God and respond to what's given with as much peace and love in our hearts as we can deploy. Thanks be to God.